Hi everyone, I'm Alex. Welcome back.
And I'm Sue. And today on our Hope Works podcast, we are going to talk a little bit about resting the brain and how important it might be. Alex, I would love to ask you, because obviously I talk about the brain all the time. I love the neuroscience. What do we mean when we talk about resting the brain? Because clearly it doesn't go to sleep all by itself.
Actually, that's probably the most important thing. So, a beautiful opening question, really. Um, so, to give some kind of background to this, we live in a society where when we talk about productivity, people think it means go, 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 keep moving all the time. And we kind of hero worship, if you like, people who overwork, spend hours and hours at work. And as I begin to talk about this, I remember working with a psychiatrist who ought to have known better, but he kind of measured his performance by being the first person at work and the last person to leave work. And that creates a situation where we feel guilty when we perceive that we're doing nothing. So if we're just sitting, or I'll talk in a little while about the other ways of resting because there are multiple ways that the brain needs to rest. But what counterintuitively we've found is the brain actually becomes more active in what we call rest.
Mm.
So it's processing problems in a different way. It can make links that we wouldn't consciously make when we're trying to think things through and work through it. So when we talk about resting, really, it's that space where we're not forcing the brain to act.
So it's when we're cognitively engaged in something, when we're trying to solve something or fix something or do something or move towards our goals, obviously your brain is processing that way. So when you talk about resting your brain, we're not always talking about doing nothing, but so what does it mean of between those cognitive components? What sort of things might we be doing or not doing that allows our brain to rest?
Sure. Well, I think everybody listening or watching this podcast will have had an experience that I'm about to describe. And it's really about resetting your brain, as it were, kind of giving it a break. Um, so you're trying to solve a problem, and it can be as simple as a crossword puzzle. And you're sitting staring at it, and you're going through it in your mind, and you're trying to work out what it is. And then you give up and you say, okay, I don't know. And then seconds later, it comes to you. So, what happens when the brain is not being focused acutely on a particular issue is it actually gears up and it starts to make different links between things. So, there's in effect four forms of rest that the brain
Okay.
needs to have.
Yep.
And it's really important that it's not that people don't just do one. The brain itself needs all four forms. So
Mhm.
the first one is the obvious one, which is physical rest.
Yeah.
We all know about the importance of sleep. Yet again, we hero worship people who don't. I lived, and I believe you did, Sue, through the Thatcher years in Britain. And Margaret Thatcher famously said she only slept 4 hours a night, but expected everybody else to only sleep 4 hours a night.
Yeah.
And that's really incredibly unhealthy for your brain. So physical rest is massively important.
So
Sorry.
I want to pick up on that one first before we go to the other three, because I think to your point, and I remember a book coming out, I don't know whether it was the 2000s or something, of like literally encouraging people to only sleep 4 hours. And then they did research on it, and it really did not go well
No.
for people. So just sort of staying with that for a moment is we do need physical rest, we do need sleep, but I know a lot of people and potentially people listening to this may have challenges around that. So can you just give us a little bit more about how we might encourage good sleep and not hero worship the 4 hours, but actually enjoy the ones that we do have?
Yeah, so I mean, as you said, really, it's reasonable to recognize that things happen. I'm a parent, and when the children were young, you know, the idea of getting a full night's sleep was just kind of unreal. But also we misunderstand what a full night's sleep looks like. So Biphasic sleep is the normal pattern for human beings. Biphasic sleep is you sleep for half the night, you're awake for an hour or so, then you go back to sleep and you sleep for the rest of the night. That's actually our biological pattern.
Oh, good. I
Uh,
do that all the time.
yeah, and the problem is again we've created this mythology around sleep, which is you must sleep for 8 hours solidly, or it's not a good night's sleep. So you wake up in the middle of the night and you think, I'm not having a good night's sleep, and you worry about it and you're concerned about it, and that disrupts your second sleep when it comes. Um, and then the following night you go to bed and you're thinking, oh, I hope I don't have a disrupted sleep like I did last night. So you disrupt your first sleep.
Yeah.
If you wake up for an hour or so in the middle of the night, you're perfectly normal. Literature, not academic literature, but literature, primarily religious literature, described this right up until the early 1900s. People would get up, they would pray, they would read, they would even actually connect with their neighbors. For an hour or so, then go back to bed. And it was the industrialization of society that changed it. So we
Mm.
went for 8 hours work, 8 hours leisure, 8 hours sleep. And that's where that myth comes from. So don't worry if you're not getting a full 8 hours, is the message. But also, napping is incredibly good for your brain.
Mm. I love my nana nap.
Exactly. It's absolutely fantastic for our brain, and it's a really important tool, if you like, to have in our toolbox. So, don't feel guilty about spending a period of time during the day just literally dozing.
Mm. And it's funny you say that, Alex, because my brain works really well now in the fact that if I have a nap, I set my alarm on my watch for either 15 minutes or sometimes 30 minutes.
Yeah.
But I find now if I've set my watch for 15 minutes, I probably wake up again after 14
Yes.
and feel
Yeah.
great. But I know if I ever sleep longer, like it goes to 45 minutes, I feel more sluggish. But 15 to 30, it's perfect.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, sir, because the science has shown us very strongly that 30 seems to be the absolute optimal. If you go past 30 minutes, then you're going to wake up feeling groggy, and
Yeah.
that will impact your sleep that night.
Yeah, love it. Okay, so that's our first way we rest the brain, and we know the
Mm.
importance of deep sleep, microglial cells, cleaning the brain,
Yeah.
REM sleep, all of this sort of stuff. I love the biphasic. Tell us what the second resting the brain is.
So that's what people might kind of intuitively jump to. It's mental resting. It's not challenging your brain. It's not looking for problems to solve. Um, one of the things that we're being taught a lot at the moment is that to prevent age-related deterioration in your mental capacity, then you should do lots of problem solving. You should do crossword puzzles, Sudoku, learn
Yeah,
a new skill, etc., etc. And that's all great, but you need to take a break from that too. You need to do things that don't tax your brain. I would argue that everybody needs to actually schedule that into every single day of their life, a period where they're doing something non-taxing, and that can be just walking in nature,
yeah.
uh, you know, watching the birds. Watching the dolphins if you're lucky enough to live somewhere like we do, uh, and just not stressing the brain is the main thing.
So that's more about allowing your brain to just wander, if you like. Because I sometimes think about I rest my brain when between meetings, I might do 10 minutes of a jigsaw puzzle. But in
Yeah.
theory, that's not complete rest because I'm still trying to figure out which pieces go in where. Um,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
this is
you're right.
more
It's what the
wandering.
wandering is a great way to describe it.
Yeah.
For a long time, I was actually coached by a gentleman in California, and he did it without knowing what he was doing. And he told me he would go outside and he would feel the leaves of the trees, and what he was doing, unknown to himself, was exactly that. He was just letting his brain wander, go wherever it needed to go.
Yeah.
And again, in those moments, you'll find that you'll solve problems.
Yeah.
So you're having a shower and the answer comes to you.
Yeah.
It's in the moments where you're not trying that you'll
Yeah.
get the resolution to the most important things.
Yeah, I love that. And it's funny, isn't it, when if we think about children sometimes,
Mm.
I don't know about you as a child, but you look at the clouds and you're like, oh, there's a dragon, oh, there's this.
Yeah,
Actually,
yes.
allowing your brain to do that can be really useful for an imagination perspective and just allowing it to process.
Yeah, some of the people who have been the most creative on our planet described this beautifully well. That's exactly what they do. They just sit.
Yeah.
I worked for a boss for a while, and at first what she did irritated me, but then I realized that what she was doing was exactly right. And she would close her office door and she would play classical music.
Yeah.
And when you heard the classical music, that meant don't interrupt.
Yeah.
And she was just sitting there, letting her brain go wherever it needed to go. And then amazingly, she would come up with some brilliant ideas.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. And it's funny, Alex, because I actually have a piece of music that I play. Ludovico Einaudi, he has various albums, but there's one called Islands. And I don't know why it's that one, but I put that on and my brain just wafts off wherever it wants to go and it feels
Brilliant.
wonderful. So I love that.
Uh,
Okay, so sleep and then mental resting, allowing our brain to wander.
Yes.
What's number three?
So sensory rest, which is actually something that we're talking about more and more in our society at the moment, switching off from screens, switching off from technology, noise in particular. We were never biologically designed to take on board all of this information, all of this sensory input that we're bombarding our brains with at the moment. Only 100 years ago, people wouldn't know the amount of information that we're bombarded with every single day.
Mm.
One of my favorite stories about Australia is related to the Melbourne Cup. And for those people who don't know this, the Melbourne Cup's actually a horse race uh, and this is the only country in the world that prides itself that it shuts a country down for a horse race.
Yeah,
Mind blown.
it is.
But anyway, in the early days of the Melbourne Cup race, people were allowed to bet in the Northern Territory for 3 days after the race had finished because they hadn't heard the result, because the information hadn't been transferred. Whereas now it's literally instantaneous.
Yeah.
And we need to switch off from all of that sensory input. And again, one of the best ways to do that is to wander in nature. We
Yeah.
can't talk more highly about the importance of getting out there, going for a walk in your local park. It doesn't have to be, I'm not talking about going on safari or something magic. It's really those small things, sitting in your garden with a cup of coffee, watching nature, do its stuff. Uh, So
Yeah.
sensory disconnect is massively important.
Yeah, and I like that. Just pick up on that a little bit more because I think that's interesting. Is yes, we've got technology around us, but we've got sounds around us. And I often travel for work, and I know sometimes, like when I go back to Sydney, even if I'm in a relatively soundproof hotel, one of the things I notice having moved to where I do now, when I go back to a city, there is constant noise. Now, when I lived in Sydney, I didn't notice it.
Yeah.
But now I've moved away. Well, like when I go to bed, we sleep with our doors open and just the screen doors,
Mhm.
and all I can hear is animals, birds,
Yeah.
frogs, cicadas, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
But when I go back to Sydney, I find I'm almost in a heightened state now because even in the middle of the night, you've got this thrum of sort of white
Yeah.
noise. Now, I have heard, Alex, and I might be wrong, but there are very few places on the planet now where you can actually go and not hear a human-made noise. And that for me is quite
Mhm.
interesting of how do we get away from all of this sensory overload if we don't have a garden, if we don't live near the beach? What other options do we have?
Yeah, and before I answer that, I'll build a little bit more on what you've just said as well, because I read some research a number of years ago, and I apologize to anybody listening. Normally, I can quote the research well, but I can't remember who did the research. But they looked at as people were traveling in a car. If they interfered with the signal to the radio in the car, how long would it take for people to try to retune their car radio? Because again, what people were doing was actually creating noise for themselves. Um, 35 seconds was the answer. If the radio went off, people couldn't sit in that silence for more than 35 seconds. They
Mm.
needed to retune, and they found that people were actually becoming quite distressed at the silence.
Yeah.
So you're right. What we've done is we've created an environment for us as human beings, which is bombarded by noise everywhere we go, and the silence has become the stress
Mm.
for us. So even as we talked before, and you talked about, finding those moments of mental rest, you talked about doing that with music,
Mm,
more noise,
yeah.
more sensory input, as it were. So I think, first of all, when I say about kind of reconditioning yourself, as we've said in so many occasions where we've met, the key is small steps here.
Yeah.
So, don't try to disconnect for 5 hours.
Mm,
We're talking a minute, building up to a minute and a half, 2 minutes, etc. So for those people who can't find an environment where they can sit naturally with, say, for example, in the garden or the park or at the beach, this will sound counterintuitive to everything I've just said, but one of I think the most powerful ways to do this is YouTube clips of nature and nature sounds.
oh, yeah.
Yes, so you can find as generally if you look for meditation practices, that's where you're going to find them on YouTube.
I love that. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
that you're absolutely right because sometimes, depending where we live, it's hard to get
mm,
away from everything that's around you.
yeah,
And to your point, I like the idea of sensory rest is yes, your eyes may still be open if you're walking in nature, but you're no longer being bombarded with the day-to-day
yeah,
human creation
yeah,
elements, I suppose.
absolutely.
Okay, so we've got sleep, we've got mental rest, and we've got sensory rest. Number four.
And this is probably the hardest one for people. So it's emotional rest.
Mm,
It's allowing yourself to be in an environment where you're not held to certain expectations. So, there's not people there expecting you to slog your guts out. There's not people there who are going to criticize you for taking a break. But also you're not doing that to yourself.
mm,
So you're giving yourself permission to just be as a human being. You're not in an environment where you feel that you're struggling or that there are challenges. So finding again a space in the day where you can actually just sit and be.
mhm.
That's the answer.
So that sounds easy.
Yeah,
Can
but
you
it's
tell me how I do that?
yeah, certainly. Yeah, yeah. And again, it's all of these things sound easy, but in the society that we've created, they're not. And I think it's really important that we recognize that humankind have created that. This is not what we live now is not the natural state for human beings. So we're going to try and force ourselves to move back to the way it should have been.
Mm,
So yet again, it's the same message that we start small. We start with really small spaces for ourselves. My advice to people would be to engage with a memory of a really positive point in their life and
mm,
sit and savor that memory. So that might be that you look at a photograph of something that brings back great memories for you. You listen to a piece of music that brings back great memories for you.
mm,
You read a book, anything that engages you with, but something real from your past, where you felt at your absolute best, and you relive that moment. You get yourself back into that space. You see what you saw, you feel what you felt at that time, and do that, and then again, just build on it and build on and build on it.
mm. So in theory, what we're actually saying here is not emotional rest, it's negative emotional rest,
Yeah,
as in,
yeah, that's a good way to describe it. Yes,
yeah, just giving ourselves a break from the constant demands on us from other people or from
yes,
ourselves, where we expect certain things of
yeah.
ourselves.
And I think there's a key message that I would like people to take away from all of what I'm saying today, which links to this emotional rest piece, which is your value to your organization, your value to your family, your value to your community or your society is not measured by how exhausted you are. But that's the value we've created for people is that I'm just go, 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 go. Um, you've contributed already. You've done wonderful things already. Remember those things, connect with those things. You
Yeah.
don't have to be exhausted to be a good human being.
Yes, in fact, you're probably a better human being when you're not exhausted.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm just going to sort of revisit this for a moment. So when I think about taking breaks from a brain perspective, I often talk about sort of macro, mezzo, micro. And macro, people go, I need a holiday. And
Yeah.
yes, if you're stressed, you're overwhelmed, you're overworked, etc., maybe you do need a holiday.
Yeah.
And that's great. You know, you've got your long weekends, you go away for a week, you go away for 2 weeks, whatever, that can be useful. But when you're in the midst of a heightened space in your life, you can't just every so often go, well, I need 4 weeks off or I need two
Yeah.
weeks off because you'd probably be
Yeah.
broke at the end of the year.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Or fired
Yeah.
at the end of
Yeah.
the year.
Yes.
But if we then go to what I think of as mezzo breaks, mezzo's breaks would be like your sleep and your weekend off, etc. But I know what we always come back to, which is where I think the numbers 2, 3, and 4. So we've got sleep as perhaps our mezzo, but then we've got the mental resting, the sensory rest, the emotional rest is micro breaks. And
Yeah.
we've every podcast we've talked about, Alex, we've talked about 2 minutes, starting
Yeah.
small. What are you doing in
Yeah.
5 minutes, 3 minutes, 1 minute, etc.? And so, can I ask you, whether it's the mental, the sensory, or the emotional, what are 3 or 4 different ways that you get those short micro breaks in your day to day?
Sure. And again, I would say that absolutely everything that you've just said is key to this. What we're talking about is a life lived well, not 2 weeks holiday lived well.
Yeah.
It's about how do you create your existence in that space. So in terms of the kind of mental rest for me, there's been a bit of a shift this year. I always read, whatever I read, it was always work related. It was always about actually subjects like this. I've started to read fiction for the first time in probably 30 years, and found that has actually made a huge difference. And yet, and this is the bizarre thing, I can actually find in the fiction stuff that assists in understanding the human condition, because
Yeah.
some of the most amazing authors really, really do understand what it's like to be a human being.
Mm.
So I found a gift in that. That's also linked to the sensory rest, because I'm using hard copy books.
Yep.
So I'm not doing it through screens. I'm not using Kindle or something similar to that. So I switch everything else off. There's no noise around me, and I'm just sitting there with a book, and that's making an enormous difference to who I am. And then in terms of the emotional rest, I have gotten this real strong habit over the last 5 or 6 years now of actually sitting, reconnecting with the best moments of my life.
Mm.
They're all pretty much the same moment. So they always involve walking hand in hand with my wife. That's the most powerfully uh, positive emotion experience I can have. But we're lucky we get the chance to relive that on a pretty regular basis as well. But but some days you can't. So
Yeah.
connecting with it is massively important.
I love that actually. And I'm going to make a connection if I may, because over the last few months, I've been having quite a bit of challenge sleeping due to a variety of things
Mhm.
that are going on in my world. But just recently, I was overseas and I was again just lots of work on, lots of things on my mind, and having trouble sleeping. And every time I got into bed, I would then start to picture my other half laying opposite me, and I'd imagine his tattoos that I could see
Right.
and whatever. And it was starting to help me really get back to, oh, okay,
Yeah.
now I'm heading off to sleep. But I want to come back to what you said about reading fiction, because to your point, I can't remember how many years ago it was, probably about maybe 6 years ago. I was like you. I realized I was only ever reading non-fiction, all of my
Yes.
non-fiction books
Yes.
for learn to learn to learn.
Yeah.
And I set myself a goal of I want to read 20 fiction books in a year.
Brilliant.
And that year I read 63
Wow, that's
because
amazing.
I was so engrossed in
Yeah.
reading. And I would, to your point, I got real books and I would carry it in my bag when I was on a
Yeah.
plane. And instead of watching movies or things like that, I would read.
Mhm.
And one of the things I remember learning, and maybe we should talk about this on another session,
Yeah.
is people who read more fiction tend to have higher levels of empathy because you
Oh,
often see different characters' viewpoints in a book.
That's
And I
beautiful.
think that's really
Yeah,
interesting. So
isn't
clearly
it?
we're developing our empathy whilst we're taking our brain out and having a bit of a rest.
That's awesome. Yeah, what to say?
So,
Yeah,
but thank you. That's really helpful because the sleep, it's really helpful to us understand that biphasic. Because I always say to people, if you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, don't, if you get to 10 to 4, go, that's it, right? I'm getting up if I'm not asleep at 4.
yeah,
Just hang out a bit longer and you'll probably drop off again.
exactly.
Um, but I think if we can all pick up on the mental, sensory, and emotional rest and take those 2 minutes here and there to go and look at a flower, gaze at the clouds, wander in nature, reflect
Yeah,
on the best things, do small things, and then we
absolutely.
can show up better for the big things, perhaps.
Yeah. And now again, in closing, I would reiterate your value is not measured by how exhausted you are.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be worn as a badge of honor.
Thank you, Alex. That
Yeah.
is super helpful. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. I hope you'll go and test some of these little things on yourself. And Alex and I will see you again very, very soon for more topics on this.
Yeah.
Bye from me.
Bye, folks.